Hello and welcome. Tonight, we have a terrifying story about the self. Who are you, really? Who is your spouse? Please note that while the story is fiction, the surgery discussed here, as well as the researchers' findings in the story, are true. As a reminder, these stories are written exclusively for this channel. So, if you would like to support these creative endeavors, please hit the like button and subscribe. Now, let's get into it. Middle America, 1955. It's a typical Saturday afternoon as my husband, Keith, and I chat in the kitchen. He's smoking a hand-rolled cigarette with his left hand, while with his right hand, he knocks a fingernail against the window to express his disapproval for the hills of snow in the backyard. He breathes in deeply, then places his lips near the bottom of the open window to exhale as frigid February air blows into the kitchen. I ignore the smoking and the cold, even though I've asked him not to smoke inside, as I continue to saute beef and onions and pasta boils on the burner next to me. I don't want a shovel today. It's so icy. I'll have to pick up some salt. Then he stops, mid-sentence. Babe, something's wrong. I'm gonna throw up. I turn around. My husband grips the edge of the sink, dropping his cigarette butt on the floor. Put a hand on his back and gaze into his face. I think I'm having another episode, he says, as he holds on to the basin so tightly that his fingernails scrape the metal. I know it's coming. I hurry to the couch and grab the padding off of it along with any cushions I can fit in my arms, and then rush back to the kitchen. My husband now stares off into middle distance at nothing as I lay the cushions on the floor. Drool flows out of the corner of one side of his mouth. Then it happens. His arms stiffen by his sides, and his knees go straight. I brace myself and guide his heavy, toppling body onto the mats. I leap up, grab the wooden spoon I'd been cooking with, and shove it in his mouth so he doesn't bite his tongue off. That's all I know to do until his seizure passes, so I pick up the cigarette butt off the floor and close the window, checking periodically that he still has the spoon in his mouth. A few minutes later, and the shaking ceases. I remove the spoon and pat down his sweaty hair. He turns onto his side, away from me, and covers his face. I'm sorry, he says. Well, you didn't pee yourself this time, I say and chuckle, but immediately realize that was the wrong thing to say. With his back to me, he pushes himself up onto an elbow and hits the ground as he lets out a yell. I flinch and my hand flies to my chest. His back trembles, this time from tears. I lean against him and give him a hug. Hey, have you looked back into the surgery we were talking about? I read some more about it and they're getting good results. He turns towards me and tilts his head side to side before he whispers, That's brain surgery. What if it changes me? I kiss his cheek and then get up to make him a cup of tea. I don't think that would happen. They're just splitting the brain down the middle. They're not removing anything. It's been 2 weeks since Keith had surgery. During that time, he's been in the hospital to ensure his recovery, which I take to be going well since he hasn't had any episodes. He even signed up to participate in research just for people who have had this surgery. Today is Keith's release date from the hospital, and as a treat, I'm allowed to go to one of these studies. Once I arrive at the hospital, a kindly nurse guides me to his room. Since his surgery, I've only talked to him on the phone, since every time I visited, he'd been fast asleep. Even though sometimes when I called, the phone would answer and hang up right away like he didn't want to talk to me, but he usually sounded happy, almost newly in love with me, speaking rapidly about every little thing going on in the hospital, while also obsessively asking about my life at home. Still, I hang back in the doorway, nervous to see him awake for the first time. I shake my hands in front of me like I'm trying to remove water droplets and force myself into the room. There he sits, his head still bandaged, but otherwise his warm brown eyes and cleft chin are exactly as I remember. He stands up and I rush towards him, then stop. Can I give you a hug? He grins widely. I would be offended if you didn't. He holds his right arm out, while his left arm remained where it was, and we exchanged a lopsided hug. Is something wrong with your left arm? I asked, stepping back. The doctors say everything is fine medically, but, the whole left side of my body has been really strange. Like sometimes when you called, my left hand, my dominant hand, would answer and then hang up. I've had to get used to talking to you with the phone pressed to my right ear. I'm sure it'll sort itself out in a few weeks. I hope so, I respond. I straighten my skirt. Do the researchers come here, or do we have to go to them? We have to go to them, he says, and with his right hand he takes my own, and we walk out of the room. Once we arrive, I sit in a chair pressed against the wall near the door, hands folded tight together in my lap, as the researchers have my husband sit in a different chair towards the center of the room. A man with a thin face and dramatic dark eyebrows cruises in. He catches me out of the corner of his eye as he heads towards my husband. He stops and turns, sticking out his right hand. And who might you be? He asks. I'm Mrs. Walker, I respond, limply shaking his hand. Ah, that's right. I forgot you would be joining us today. Do you know what we're doing here, Mrs. Walker? He asks as he absent-mindedly brushes his hand, the one that had just touched mine, off on his pants. I'm afraid I don't completely understand it. Something about the effects of my husband's surgery? Yes. We cut the corpus callosum, the part that connects the left and right hemispheres, and as those two hemispheres are no longer in communication with each other, we want to understand how the left and right hemispheres differ. He explains and then leans in conspiratorially. Want to see something interesting? I purse my lips together and nod rapidly. Okay, he says, winking. He walks up to my husband and places a warm hand on his back. Lovely wife you've got over there, Mr. Walker. I know, he says. But as he says this, his eyes slide over to me and I could swear he was glaring at me. I furrow my brow and shiver as the researcher keeps talking. Something to pay attention to is that the brain is cross-wired. What that means is that if I show just the left eye something, the right hemisphere will see it. Same the other way around. Just show the right eye something and only the left hemisphere will know what that item is. Of course, in people who don't have split brains, this doesn't matter because the two sides communicate in microseconds, but with split brains, well, that's a different story. The researcher pads over to me, and almost like a magician, he says, Okay, I'm going to show you alone what's in my hand. Don't tell your husband. He opens his cupped hands towards me while shielding any view of the item from my husband. Inside his hands lays an old-fashioned key. My lips tug at the edges like I've just eaten a sweet candy. He covers the key again and places it in his pocket. Now, he says, pointing his finger up toward the sky, I'm going to choose a different item and allow your husband's right eye to see it. Remember, The right eye hooks up to the left side of the brain. And so far, we've figured out that that side of the brain, the left side, controls speech. My husband places his chin on a platform, and in front of him are two eye holes. The researcher places a card between the eye holes, cutting off my husband's peripheral vision. Then, the researcher pulls out a chapstick from his pocket and allows just my husband's right eye to see it. "What was that item, Mr. Walker?" "A chapstick." My husband responds obediently with a half smile. "Correct. For the other side, I'll show his left eye the mystery item." He places the key before my husband's left eye. "What was the item, Mr. Walker?" "I have no idea," my husband says, and I get the feeling he's been through this routine more than a few times. Perfect. Now get this, Mrs. Walker. The researcher places a pencil in my husband's left hand and a piece of paper in front of him. "Can you write what you saw?" My husband writes, "Old key," then flings the pencil down on the desk. It skitters and falls to the floor. But the researcher ignores this and snatches up the paper. He holds it to the sky and says, "Yes!" He turns to me. "You see, the left eye connects to the right brain, which controls the left side of the body. So, it's not that your husband didn't see the item at all. It's just that the verbal part of his brain didn't. Isn't that amazing?" I nod slowly, gazing at my husband, who is clenching and unclenching his left fist. The researcher continues. "It's almost like over time, the different halves develop different personalities. I've had a patient in here who, when you asked him what his ideal job would be, he said race car driver. But if you asked him to write it with his left hand, he would write an accountant. Another patient had a sweater on with these big buttons, and one hand kept undoing the buttons to take it off, while the other hand kept putting the buttons back together. It's like there's two people living in there." On the way back home, I drive, since even though the hospital has released him, he shouldn't be operating a car yet. As my body goes through the automatic motions of steering, my mind spins over and over about how I should broach the subject of the research. At last, I just blurt out, "Babe, do you even like participating in this research program? I saw your hand clenched in a fist almost the entire time." "Of course I do. I love it," he responds. "The opportunity to inform the world and being in such a unique position to be able to help. It's the kind of opportunity I never would have had without this surgery." As soon as those words escape his mouth, my husband's left hand yanks the steering wheel. I scream and slam on the brakes, but the car slid sideways over the ice. "What are you doing?" "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm just having a spasm in my hand. We're only a few blocks from the house. Just keep going. I'll hold this hand down." He answers and uses his right hand and leg to capture his left hand. My chin trembles, but I push tears away as I slowly inch the car forward and straighten it back onto the road, while keeping half an eye on my husband. Once we pull into the driveway, an idea pops into my head, and on the fly, I lie. "Did you know that one of the researcher's birthdays is coming up? Wouldn't it be nice to write him a little note? Say happy birthday and how much you love the research?" "That's a wonderful idea. You're so caring." We step out of the car, and I run ahead into the house to get the stack of thank you cards I keep on hand. I place them on our round wooden table as my husband is still pulling off his jacket. "Oh, what's the rush?" he asks as he sits down. "Nothing. I'm just going to the mailbox anyway, so might as well get this over and done with," I answer, pushing a pen into his left hand, which he snatches. Then I nod towards the card, but he's already writing. After just seconds, in a jagged, dark script, are the words, "I hate you." He drops the pen and points at me with his left hand. My husband and I gasp at the same time as we read the words, and he says, "No, I love you." I cover my mouth and back away. Through my fingers, I say, "But part of you hates me." His left hand picks up the pen, and he throws it, and it bounces off my arm. I widen my eyes. Then that hand gestures for me to leave. "Babe, please. I think it must be a reaction from the surgery," he replies, his right hand grabbing his left and holding it down. I've moved away from him so far that my back hits the wall at the end of the room. I don't think that's just a twitch. I think you've just always controlled that part of yourself. But now that your brain is cut, the part that hates me can act independently. This is all too much to watch and comprehend. I run out the door and take the car to my sister's. Over the next few months, my husband and I talk on the phone, and it broke my heart because his voice sounded like he loved me. But every time we met in person, his left hand would try to hurt me or make rude gestures. I tell him I need time to think, a few weeks at least. About a month into my thinking time, I receive a box from my husband. Thinking he wanted to send me chocolates or something, I rip it open. Inside, in a clear plastic bag, is my husband's severed left hand. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like more horror, I suggest the one on the screen now called "What's Following Me Up the Stairs?" I scared myself while writing it, so you might get a scare too. If you want to know more about split brain research, which is a fascinating topic, I cannot suggest highly enough a book called Tales from Both Sides of the Brain, A Life in Neuroscience by Michael S. Gazzaniga. Now, I'll see you in the next one.